Good morning and welcome to another episode of Drew's Book Reviews. Today we are talking about The Hive by Orson Scott Card and Aaron Johnston. So this is the second book in the second Formic War trilogy from the Enderverse. So if you're interested, stay tuned. Alright, so talking about The Hive by Orson Scott Card and Aaron Johnston. So this is the second book in the second Formic War trilogy. Now, the Formic Wars themselves predate Ender's Game. Now, if you have not read Ender's Game, it is one of the best science fiction books I've ever read. I read it as a child, and it's just always stuck with me. And it was what spawned what has been termed the Enderverse, where Orson Scott Card kind of takes the story in Ender's Game and continues it on throughout an entire series of books, which branch off. Ender's Game is kind of the branching point where you kind of get two separate series going on, and then the Formic Wars kind of is where we come in from behind before all the events of Ender's Game. So the first Formic War trilogy is Earth Unaware, Earth of Fire, and Earth Awakens. And then, of course, the second Formic War trilogy picking up with The Swarm and The Hive. And from what I understand, a book titled The Queen, which hasn't yet been released. So I guess we'll wait and see when that gets released. So The Hive is basically our three characters. We got Bingwen, which is a Chinese child soldier who got caught up in the first invasion as the Formics, these scary, creepy, insectoid-like bug aliens, invaded China. And they basically razed China to the ground, destroyed it, trying to terraform the world. Is where they landed initially, in China, to suit and change the Earth to meet their own needs. And we got Mazer Rackham. Now, Mazer Rackham is the hero of the first war of the Formics. Well, one of the heroes anyway, along with Bingwen. So they are these two basically are out there on their way to what is basically becoming the foundation of what will become known as the Battle School. And so this book really kind of focuses on the politics of what's going on in the world at that time. You've got the global hegemon. He is like the ruler of Earth, which in and of itself is interesting. I know, well, I don't know if it was David Rockefeller personally, or for sure, but I've heard that the people like David Rockefeller said all the world needs is one great tragedy, one existential threat, in order to unite mankind under a new world order and a single global government. Well, the Formic alien invasion is that thing in this universe that has united the world under a global government with a global hegemon. But even the hegemony is not free from the political strife and turmoil that comes along with the political offices. So we have Bingwen, who has basically been enlisted by the International Fleet as a child soldier at this point, along with some of his comrades. And of course, there's the politics involved of whether you should or shouldn't enlist children as soldiers in a military campaign. And so they kind of skirt around this by referring to this grav camp, as they put it, for training in zero-G gravity combat. They kind of changed that around to make it sound like be like a school instead of a actual military institution and being part of the military. So there's this political strife involved with that, and that's definitely a focus of this story, is the politics involved with that. And what we see here is the Hive itself. Now, we don't actually encounter the Formic Hive in this book, but central to the theme of the book is this idea that the Formics are utilizing the solar system's resources to build this massive superstructure, super ship with the Hive. Now, at this point in the wars, there is no evidence of a hive queen. And so the politics involved is that the military and international fleet have essentially outlawed the idea of a hive queen, which, it's basically they're turning a blind eye to the reality of it. Now, granted, at this point in the story, they don't know that the hive queen exists for sure. It's just a theory with no evidence. But the very fact that they've outlawed even talking about this is essentially their way of trying to ignore the possibilities and potentials and what that means for the greater conflict and the greater war involved within this overall series. And overall, I have to say that I'm really enjoying this book series. Overall, I do like Orson Scott Card and his writing style. I think that he's got some great writing, and the Enderverse itself is one of my favorite science fiction series. Definitely would not put it up there as my top favorite science fiction series. If you were to ask me right now, I'd probably say Dune is my top favorite science fiction series. But the whole Enderverse itself is definitely an entertaining read in terms of politics and military and how it all comes together into a greater whole. Now, one thing that I will say about this book, and I did give it a 3 out of 5 star review on Goodreads, primarily because I just found that there were some things in it that just seemed to be so cliche that really kind of knocked it down for me. And the biggest thing there is the cliche ideology of the Russian bad guy. That this is not something that works for me anymore, honestly. It seems so overdone. This Americanism versus this Russian bad guy ideology is within this book and this particular series. And you got both sides gunning for top job in the world, and they're clashing and they're not getting along, and politically it's just so overdone as far as the Russia versus America bad guy whole situation. And I didn't enjoy that aspect of it. I thought that's either do without it or honestly maybe try and find some other way to have these political things. Why is it Russia painted the bad guy every time? It just seems so overdone when there's a lot of potential elsewhere as well. But I mean, that really kind of brought it down for me. And I do have to admit that the more I've learned about Orson Scott Card in general, the more I kind of see his writing in a different light. If you were to ask me like 5 years ago, if I'd read this book 5 years ago, I probably would have given it a 5-star review. But at this point, I kind of gave it a 3-star review, not because I think it's a terrible book by any means. Otherwise, I'd only have a 1 or a 2. I definitely wouldn't put it up there as a top science fiction read. And mainly because I kind of see a little bit more of his own politics and ideology within the book itself, and in the writing, so that kind of sours it a bit for me, I guess is the best way to put it. But in the end, I absolutely enjoy the Enderverse as a whole. And whenever The Queen, the third book in the second Formic War, gets released, you could bet that I'm probably going to get it. And probably going to continue to read it. Because like I said, the Enderverse overall is easily a 4.5, 5-star series for me as a whole. As opposed to on a single book basis. Like I said, absolutely loved it. Thought it was really great read, good book, enjoyable book, and I thought everything was well overall. But definitely in some cases, some cases definitely came across as a little bit cliched, tired, and overdone as far as the politics and that kind of thing go with it. But anyway, those are just some of my thoughts on The Hive. By Orson Scott Card and Aaron Johnston, second book in the Formic War series, or a second book in the second Formic War trilogy. Definitely check it out, and definitely check out the whole Enderverse as a whole. Ender's Game, the Enderverse in general as a whole, really, really great. And those are just some of my thoughts. So again, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll see you next time on Drew's Book Reviews. Until then, keep on reading. Bye.